Welcome once again to the timeless banks of the Nile, where the gentle evening breeze carries the scent of lotus blossoms and the soft murmur of water flowing toward the Mediterranean Sea. Tonight, we embark on perhaps the most human of all journeys exploring love, courtship, and marriage in ancient Egypt, where matters of the heart were governed by both practical considerations and deep spiritual beliefs. As the stars of Nut, the sky goddess, begin to appear in the darkening heavens above, we'll discover how young Egyptians found love, how families arranged marriages, and how couples built lives together in a civilization that valued both romantic passion and social stability. The ancient Egyptians understood that love was a force as powerful as the Nile's flood, capable of bringing both joy and chaos to human life. Tonight's gentle exploration will take us through the gardens where young people met, the ceremonies that bound couples together, and the homes where families flourished under the protection of household gods. Close your eyes and let the warm desert wind carry you back to a time when love letters were written on papyrus and wedding gifts included furniture made from precious woods. In ancient Egypt, the pursuit of love was considered both an art and a sacred duty, governed by customs that balanced individual desire with family expectations and social responsibilities. Young Egyptians approached courtship with a combination of passion and pragmatism that reflected their civilization's sophisticated understanding of human nature and social harmony. The process of finding a suitable partner typically began when young people reached their mid-teens, though the exact age varied depending on social class and family circumstances. Wealthy families often began considering marriage arrangements for their children much earlier, while working-class families might wait until their children were old enough to contribute meaningfully to a household's economic well-being. Egyptian society provided numerous opportunities for young people to meet and interact, despite the fact that many marriages were arranged by families. Religious festivals, market days, and community celebrations created social spaces where young men and women could see each other and begin the delicate process of mutual evaluation that preceded formal courtship. The gardens and courtyards of wealthy homes were particularly important venues for courtship, as they provided settings where young people could meet under the watchful eyes of family members, while still having opportunities for private conversation. These spaces were carefully designed to facilitate social interaction, with shaded areas for conversation and beautiful plantings that created romantic atmospheres. These garden courtyards were architectural marvels in their own right, featuring carefully planned layouts that maximized both beauty and functionality. Wealthy Egyptian families spared no expense in creating these spaces, importing exotic plants from distant lands, and employing skilled gardeners who understood the art of creating environments that would inspire romance and facilitate meaningful conversation. The typical courtyard garden featured a central pool or fountain that provided both visual beauty and practical cooling in the hot Egyptian climate. These water features were often decorated with lotus flowers and papyrus plants, creating connections to the sacred Nile that flowed through Egyptian spiritual life. The sound of gently moving water provided a soothing backdrop for conversation, while also masking private words from curious ears. Pathways through these gardens were designed to encourage leisurely strolling, with strategic placement of benches, and shaded alcoves where couples could pause for more intimate conversation. The plantings were chosen not only for their beauty, but also for their symbolic meanings in Egyptian culture. Date palms represented fertility and abundance, while trees were associated with the goddess Hathor and her protection of lovers. Music and poetry played central roles in Egyptian courtship, with young men expected to demonstrate their cultural sophistication and emotional depth through artistic expression. The ability to compose and perform love songs was considered an essential skill for any young man hoping to win a bride, and many ancient Egyptian love poems have survived to give us insights into the romantic sensibilities of this ancient civilization. Egyptian love poetry was remarkably sophisticated, employing complex metaphors and imagery drawn from the natural world along the Nile. Young lovers compared each other to flowers, birds, and precious stones, creating elaborate verbal pictures that expressed both physical attraction and emotional connection. These poems were often accompanied by music played on harps, flutes, and other instruments that added emotional depth to the words. The harp was particularly favored for romantic music, as its gentle tones were considered especially suitable for expressing tender emotions. Young men who could play the harp skillfully were highly sought after as suitors, and many wealthy families ensured that their sons received musical training as part of their preparation for adult life. The instrument itself was often beautifully decorated with inlays of precious metals and stones, making it as much a work of art as a musical tool. Flutes and reed pipes were also popular instruments for courtship music, as they could produce haunting melodies that seemed to capture the longing and uncertainty that characterized young love. These instruments were portable and relatively inexpensive, making them accessible to young men from less wealthy families who still wanted to demonstrate their romantic sensibilities through music. The exchange of gifts was another important element of Egyptian courtship, with young men expected to demonstrate their affection and their ability to provide for a family through carefully chosen presents. These gifts ranged from simple flowers and fruits to elaborate jewelry and cosmetics, depending on the suitor's wealth and the seriousness of his intentions. Flowers held special significance in Egyptian courtship, with different blooms carrying specific meanings that allowed young people to communicate complex emotions without speaking directly. Lotus flowers, sacred to many Egyptian deities, represented rebirth and eternal love. Blue lotus was particularly prized for its association with the sun god Ra and its supposed ability to induce pleasant dreams and visions. Papyrus flowers, with their distinctive umbrella-like heads, symbolized the life-giving power of the Nile and were often given to express hopes for a fertile and prosperous marriage. Jasmine flowers, with their intense fragrance, represented the intoxicating power of love and were considered especially appropriate gifts for expressing passionate attraction. Jewelry was particularly significant in courtship, as it served multiple purposes beyond mere decoration. A piece of jewelry demonstrated the giver's wealth and taste, while also serving as a tangible reminder of his affection that the recipient could wear and display. The most common courtship gifts included bracelets, necklaces, and rings made from gold, silver, and precious stones. The craftsmanship of Egyptian jewelry was extraordinarily sophisticated, with artisans capable of creating intricate designs that incorporated religious symbols, natural motifs, and personal messages. A bracelet might feature alternating lotus, flowers, and ankh symbols, expressing both romantic love and wishes for eternal life. Necklaces often incorporated protective amulets alongside decorative elements, showing the giver's concern for his beloved's safety and well-being. Rings held special significance in Egyptian courtship, as they were seen as symbols of eternity. Due to their circular shape, a ring given during courtship was understood to represent the giver's hope for an eternal bond with the recipient. The most elaborate courtship rings featured scarab beetles, symbols of rebirth and transformation, suggesting that the relationship would transform both partners into better versions of themselves. Cosmetics and perfumes were also popular courtship gifts, as they allowed young men to demonstrate their understanding of feminine beauty and their desire to enhance their beloved's natural attractiveness. These gifts were often presented in beautiful containers that became treasured possessions in their own right. Egyptian cosmetics were far more than simple beauty aids. They were sophisticated products that combined aesthetic enhancement with practical benefits and spiritual protection. Kohl, the black eye makeup that was ubiquitous in Egyptian society, was believed to protect the wearer from evil spirits while also enhancing the natural beauty of the eyes. A young man who gave his beloved a beautiful kohl container was expressing his desire to protect her as well as to celebrate her beauty. Perfumes were created from complex blends of oils, resins, and aromatic plants that required considerable skill to produce. The most prized perfumes incorporated frankincense and myrrh, expensive imports that demonstrated the giver's wealth and his willingness to spare no expense for his beloved's pleasure. These perfumes were often stored in alabaster containers that were works of art in themselves, carved with intricate designs and polished to a lustrous finish. The role of families in courtship was complex and varied depending on social class and individual circumstances. Wealthy families often took active roles in arranging meetings between suitable young people, while also maintaining strict supervision to ensure that courtship proceeded according to proper social conventions. Parents and other family members served as intermediaries in many courtships, carrying messages between young people and helping to negotiate the practical arrangements that would be necessary if a marriage were to take place. This involvement wasn't necessarily restrictive. Experienced adults could provide valuable guidance and support that helped young people navigate the complex emotions and social expectations surrounding courtship. Mothers played particularly important roles in their daughters' courtships, teaching them the subtle arts of attraction and communication that would help them find suitable husbands. These lessons covered everything from proper deportment and conversation skills to the use of cosmetics and perfumes. A young woman's mother was her primary advisor on matters of the heart, helping her interpret the signals and gestures that constituted the language of courtship. Fathers were responsible for evaluating potential suitors from practical perspectives, assessing their ability to provide for a family and their suitability as members of the extended family network. This evaluation process could be quite thorough, involving investigations into the young man's family background, financial prospects, and personal character. The concept of romantic love was well understood and valued in Egyptian society, but it was balanced against practical considerations such as economic compatibility, social status, and family alliances. Young Egyptians were encouraged to follow their hearts, but they were also expected to consider the broader implications of their choices for their families and communities. This balance between love and practicality was reflected in Egyptian literature and art, which celebrated passionate romance while also acknowledging the importance of stable, harmonious relationships. Love songs spoke of overwhelming desire and emotional intensity, while marriage contracts dealt with property rights and financial obligations. Both aspects were considered essential for successful relationships. Physical attraction was openly acknowledged as an important element of successful relationships, and Egyptian art and literature celebrated the beauty of the human form in ways that would be considered quite progressive by many later civilizations. Young people were encouraged to take care of their appearance and to present themselves attractively to potential partners. Egyptian standards of beauty emphasized health, cleanliness, and symmetry rather than any particular body type or facial features. Both men and women were expected to maintain good hygiene, wear attractive clothing, and present themselves with confidence and grace. The use of cosmetics and perfumes was considered normal and appropriate for both sexes, though the specific products and techniques varied. The process of courtship could last anywhere from a few weeks to several years, depending on the circumstances of the individuals involved and the complexity of the arrangements that needed to be made. During this time, young couples would gradually get to know each other better, while their families negotiated the practical details of a potential marriage. Longer courtships were generally preferred, as they allowed both partners to develop genuine affection and understanding before committing to marriage. This period also gave families time to observe the couple's compatibility and to work out any potential problems before they became serious issues. Religious considerations also played important roles in courtship, as young Egyptians sought the blessing of the gods on their romantic endeavors. Prayers and offerings were made to deities associated with love and fertility, particularly Hathor, who was believed to govern matters of the heart and to protect women during childbirth. The goddess Hathor was often invoked by young women seeking love, and her temples served as gathering places where young people could meet under the protection of divine blessing. Festivals dedicated to Hathor were particularly important social events where courtship activities were not only permitted but actively encouraged. These festivals featured music, dancing, and elaborate feasts that created festive atmospheres, perfect for romance. Young people would dress in their finest clothing and jewelry, hoping to catch the eye of potential partners while also honoring the goddess who governed their romantic destinies. The festivals often lasted for several days, providing extended opportunities for courtship activities. Egyptian marriage ceremonies were elaborate, celebrations that combined religious ritual, social celebration, and legal formality into events that could last for several days and involve entire communities. These ceremonies served multiple purposes. They publicly announced the union of two families, invoked divine blessing on the new couple, and established the legal and social framework within which the marriage would exist. The preparation for an Egyptian wedding began weeks or even months before the actual ceremony, involving extensive negotiations between the families of the bride and groom. These discussions covered not only the practical arrangements for the wedding itself, but also the financial and legal agreements that would govern the marriage relationship. The most important of these negotiations concerned the bride price and dowry, financial arrangements that ensured both families had stakes. In the success of the marriage, the bride price was paid by the groom's family to the bride's family, compensating them for the loss of their daughter's labor and demonstrating the groom's ability to provide for his new wife. The dowry consisted of property and goods that the bride brought to the marriage, providing her with some financial security and contributing to the new household's prosperity. These financial arrangements were far more complex than simple monetary transactions. They involved careful calculations of property values, future earning potential, and family status that required considerable negotiation and compromise. Wealthy families might spend months working out the details of these arrangements, while poorer families could usually reach agreements more quickly due to their simpler circumstances. The bride price typically included both immediate payments and long-term commitments. The immediate payment might consist of gold, silver, livestock, or other valuable goods that were transferred at the time of the wedding. Long-term commitments could include promises to support the bride's parents in their old age or to provide conics assistance during times of economic hardship. The dowry served as the bride's insurance policy, providing her with resources that remained under her control even after marriage. Egyptian law was quite progressive in protecting women's property rights, allowing wives to maintain ownership of their dowry property and to pass it on to their children. This legal protection gave women considerable economic security and social status within their marriages. Wedding preparations also involved extensive planning for the ceremony itself, including arrangements for food, entertainment, decorations, and guest accommodations. Wealthy families might hire professional entertainers, commission special decorations, and prepare elaborate feasts that would be remembered for years to come. The wedding feast was particularly important, as it demonstrated the family's prosperity and their commitment to celebrating the new union properly. These feasts could include dozens of different dishes featuring the finest foods available, and prepared by skilled cooks who specialized in ceremonial cuisine. The menu typically included roasted meats, fresh fish from the Nile, elaborate breads and pastries, fresh fruits and vegetables, and generous quantities of beer and wine. Entertainment for wedding celebrations included musicians, dancers, acrobats, and storytellers who performed throughout the festivities. Professional musicians would play harps, flutes, drums, and other instruments, while singers performed traditional wedding songs that celebrated love, fertility, and prosperity. Dancers, often wearing elaborate costumes and jewelry, would perform choreographed routines that told stories of romance and divine blessing. The actual wedding ceremony typically took place over several days, with different events marking various stages of the marriage process. The first day often featured purification rituals for both bride and groom, who would bathe in specially prepared water and anoint themselves with sacred oils and perfumes. These purification rituals were considered essential for removing any spiritual impurities that might interfere with the marriage's success. The bride and groom would be attended by family members and friends who helped them prepare for the ceremony, while offering prayers and blessings for their future happiness. The bride's preparation was particularly elaborate, involving hours of bathing, hairstyling, makeup application, and dressing in ceremonial garments. Her female relatives and friends would assist in this process, sharing advice about marriage and offering emotional support as she prepared to leave her family home and begin her new life. The groom's preparation was somewhat less elaborate, but still involved careful attention to his appearance and spiritual state. He would be attended by his male relatives and friends, who would offer advice about his responsibilities as a husband and help him prepare for the ceremony. The central wedding ceremony typically took place on the second day, featuring the formal exchange of vows and the legal formalities that made the marriage official. This ceremony was usually held in the bride's family home or in a temple, depending on the family's preferences and social status. The exchange of vows in Egyptian weddings was relatively simple compared to modern ceremonies, focusing on the couple's commitment to each other and their acceptance of their new roles as husband and wife. The vows were often accompanied by the exchange of rings or other symbolic objects that represented the couple's eternal bond. Legal formalities included the signing of marriage contracts that specified the rights and obligations of both spouses. These contracts were quite detailed, covering everything from property rights and inheritance laws to the procedures for divorce if the marriage should fail. The contracts were witnessed by family members and community leaders, making them legally binding documents that could be enforced by the courts. Religious elements of the ceremony included prayers and offerings to various deities associated with marriage and fertility. The couple would make offerings to Hathor, the goddess of love, and two other deities who were believed to protect married couples and bless them with children. The third day of wedding celebrations typically featured the formal transfer of the bride to her new home, a procession that was both practical and symbolic. The bride would be escorted from her family's house to her husband's house in a ceremonial parade that included music, dancing, and elaborate displays of the couple's wedding gifts. This procession served multiple purposes. It publicly announced the completion of the marriage, displayed the wealth and status of both families, and provided an opportunity for the entire community to participate in the celebration. The route of the procession was often planned to pass by important landmarks and to include as many community members as possible. The bride's trousseau, consisting of her clothing, jewelry, household goods, and personal possessions, would be displayed during this procession as a demonstration of her family's generosity and her own value as a wife. These items represented not only material wealth, but also the skills and accomplishments that the bride would bring to her new household. Upon arriving at the groom's house, the bride would be formally welcomed by her new family in ceremonies that emphasized her acceptance into their household and her new role as a daughter-in-law. These ceremonies often included the presentation of gifts from the groom's family and the sharing of special foods that symbolized prosperity and fertility. The final stage of the wedding celebration was the consummation of the marriage, which was considered the moment when the couple became truly united as husband and wife. This event was surrounded by various customs and rituals designed to ensure the couple's fertility and the success of their marriage. Wedding gifts played important roles in Egyptian marriage ceremonies, serving both practical and symbolic functions. Guests would present the couple with items that would help them establish their new household, including furniture, cooking utensils, textiles, and decorative objects. The most valuable wedding gifts were often pieces of furniture made from precious woods and decorated with inlays of ivory, gold, or precious stones. These items served as status symbols that demonstrated the couple's social position, while also providing practical benefits for their daily lives. Textiles were also popular wedding gifts, including fine linens for clothing and household use, decorative tapestries for wall hangings, and elaborate carpets for floor coverings. These items were often made by the female relatives of both families, representing hours of skilled labor and serving as tangible expressions of love and support for the new couple. Religious objects were common wedding gifts, including amulets for protection, statues of household gods, and ceremonial vessels for making offerings. These gifts reflected the important role that religion played in Egyptian family life and the belief that divine protection was essential for a successful marriage. Once the wedding celebrations concluded and the couple settled into married life, they faced the practical challenges of establishing a household and building a family within the complex social and economic framework of ancient Egyptian society. Family life in Egypt was governed by well-established customs and expectations that balanced individual desires with community needs and religious obligations. The typical Egyptian household was an extended family unit that might include not only the married couple and their children, but also elderly parents, unmarried siblings, and various servants or dependents. This arrangement provided economic advantages and social support, while also creating complex relationships that required careful management and diplomacy. The physical layout of Egyptian homes reflected these family structures, with different areas designated for various family members and activities. Wealthy homes featured separate quarters for men and women, private chambers for the head of household and his wife, and communal areas where the extended family could gather for meals and social activities. The master bedroom was typically the largest and most elaborately decorated room in the house, reflecting the importance of the marital relationship. In Egyptian society, these rooms featured fine furniture, beautiful textiles, and religious objects that were believed to protect the couple and promote fertility. The bed itself was often a work of art, made from precious woods and decorated with intricate carvings and inlays. Women's quarters in wealthy homes included areas for personal grooming, textile work, and childcare. These spaces were designed to provide privacy and comfort, while also facilitating the various domestic activities that were considered women's responsibilities. The rooms were often decorated with images of female deities and symbols of fertility and protection. Men's quarters typically included areas for conducting business, entertaining guests, and pursuing personal interests. These spaces reflected the male head of household's role as the family's representative in the broader community and his responsibility for the family's economic well-being. The daily routine of married life in ancient Egypt was structured around the demands of work. family obligations, and religious observances. Most couples rose before dawn to take advantage of the cooler morning hours for their most demanding activities. The day typically began with prayers and offerings to household gods, followed by a simple breakfast and the beginning of the day's work. Household management was primarily the wife's responsibility, though the specific duties varied, depending on the family's social status and economic circumstances. Wealthy wives supervised large staffs of servants and managed complex households that might include multiple properties and business interests. Poorer wives performed most household tasks themselves, with help from their children and perhaps one or two servants. The management of food supplies was one of the most important aspects of household administration, requiring careful planning and considerable skill. Egyptian wives had to ensure that their families had adequate nutrition throughout the year. Despite seasonal variations in food availability and the periodic disruptions caused by poor Nile floods or other natural disasters, food storage was a critical concern, as families needed to preserve surplus food from the harvest season to sustain them through the rest of the year. Egyptian households used various preservation techniques, including drying, salting, and fermentation, to extend the shelf life of perishable foods. Grain was stored in large ceramic jars or underground chambers that protected it from moisture and pests. The preparation of daily meals required considerable time and effort, as most foods had to be processed from their raw state. Grain had to be ground into flour, meat had to be butchered and cooked, and vegetables had to be cleaned and prepared. Wealthy households employed specialized cooks and kitchen staff, while poorer families relied on the wife and older children to handle these tasks. Textile production was another major household responsibility that occupied much of women's time and energy. Egyptian families produced most of their own clothing and household textiles, from the growing and processing of flax to the weaving and sewing of finished garments. This work required considerable skill and represented a significant economic contribution to the household's well-being. The process of textile production began with the cultivation of flax, which was grown in fields along the Nile and harvested when the plants reached maturity. The flax fibers had to be extracted from the plant stems through a complex process of retting, breaking, and combing that required both skill and patience. Once the fibers were prepared, they could be spun into thread using simple spindles and then woven into cloth on looms that ranged from simple hand-operated devices to large, complex machines that could produce fine, elaborate fabrics. The quality of the finished cloth depended on the skill of the spinner and weaver, as well as the quality of the original fibers. Child rearing was considered one of the most important responsibilities of married couples, as children represented both the continuation of the family line and the parent's security in old age. Egyptian parents invested considerable time and resources in their children's upbringing, providing them with education, training, and moral guidance that would prepare them for adult life. The birth of children was celebrated as a blessing from the gods, particularly from deities associated with fertility and childbirth. Pregnant women received special care and attention, including protective amulets, special foods, and the services of skilled midwives who assisted during labor and delivery. Egyptian children were cherished and indulged during their early years, with parents believing that love and affection were essential for proper development. Young children were allowed considerable freedom to play and explore, though they were also expected to begin learning basic skills and social behaviors at an early age. Education was highly valued in Egyptian society, with parents making significant sacrifices to ensure that their children received appropriate training for their future roles. Boys from wealthy families were often sent to schools where they learned reading, writing, mathematics, and other skills that would prepare them for careers in government, religion, or business. Girls' education focused more on domestic skills and social graces, though some girls from wealthy families also learned to read and write. All children, regardless of gender, were expected to learn the religious and moral principles that governed Egyptian society. The relationship between husbands and wives in ancient Egypt was generally characterized by mutual respect and cooperation, though the specific dynamics varied depending on individual personalities and circumstances. Egyptian law provided women with considerable rights and protections, including the ability to own property, conduct business, and initiate divorce proceedings. Marriage contracts typically specified the rights and responsibilities of both spouses, creating legal frameworks that protected both parties' interests. These contracts could be quite detailed, covering everything from property ownership and inheritance, rights to the procedures for resolving disputes, and the grounds for divorce. Egyptian wives enjoyed more legal and social freedom than women in many other ancient civilizations. They could own and manage property independently of their husbands, engage in business transactions, and represent themselves in legal proceedings. This independence was both a practical necessity and a reflection of Egyptian society's relatively egalitarian values. The division of labor within Egyptian marriages was generally based on traditional gender roles, but there was considerable flexibility depending on individual circumstances and abilities. Husbands were typically responsible for earning income and representing the family in public affairs, while wives managed household affairs and child-rearing responsibilities. However, these roles were not rigidly enforced, and many couples developed arrangements that reflected their particular skills and interests. Some wives became involved in their husbands' business affairs, while some husbands took active roles in household management and child care. Religious observances played important roles in Egyptian family life, with couples expected to maintain household shrines and participate in community religious activities. These observances served both spiritual and social functions, connecting families to their communities and providing frameworks for moral and ethical behavior. Household shrines typically included statues or images of various deities, particularly those associated with protection, fertility, and prosperity. Families would make daily offerings at these shrines and pray for divine blessing on their activities and relationships. Community religious festivals provided opportunities for families to participate in larger social and spiritual celebrations. These events strengthened community bonds while also reinforcing shared values and beliefs that supported stable family life. The intimate aspects of marriage in ancient Egypt were understood to be essential components of successful relationships, with physical and emotional intimacy viewed as both natural expressions of love and important factors in maintaining marital harmony. Egyptian attitudes toward sexuality were generally positive and open, reflecting their belief that physical pleasure was a gift from the gods that should be enjoyed within appropriate social contexts. Egyptian literature and art celebrated romantic and sexual love with a frankness that might surprise modern observers. Love poems described physical attraction and sexual desire in vivid, sensual language, while artistic depictions of couples showed affectionate and intimate interactions that revealed the importance of emotional and physical connection in marriage. The ancient Egyptians understood that successful marriages required more than just practical compatibility and social appropriateness. They recognized that couples needed to develop deep emotional bonds and satisfying physical relationships if their marriages were to provide the happiness and fulfillment that made life meaningful. This understanding was reflected in the advice that parents gave to their children about marriage and in the guidance provided by religious and community leaders. Young people were encouraged to seek partners with whom they could develop genuine affection and physical attraction, not just practical partnerships for economic or social advancement. The Egyptian concept of love encompassed both passionate desire and tender affection, recognizing that successful relationships needed both elements to thrive over time. Love poetry from the period describes the intense emotions of new love, while also celebrating the deeper, more stable affection that developed between couples who had shared their lives for many years. Physical intimacy was considered an important aspect of marital relationships, with both partners expected to contribute to their mutual satisfaction and pleasure. Egyptian medical texts included detailed information about sexual health and techniques, indicating that these matters were discussed openly and that knowledge about them was considered important for maintaining healthy relationships. The Egyptians believed that sexual satisfaction was important for both physical and emotional health, and they developed various practices and remedies designed to enhance sexual pleasure and address problems that might arise. These approaches combined practical knowledge with spiritual beliefs, reflecting their holistic understanding of human well-being. Fertility was obviously a major concern for married couples, as children were essential for family continuity and economic security. However, the Egyptians also understood that sexual relationships served purposes beyond reproduction, providing emotional bonding and physical pleasure that strengthened marital relationships. This understanding led to the development of various contraceptive methods that allowed couples to control the timing and number of their children while still maintaining active sexual relationships. These methods ranged from herbal preparations that were believed to prevent conception to physical barriers that blocked fertilization. Egyptian medical texts describe various contraceptive techniques with remarkable sophistication, indicating that these matters were studied seriously and that effective methods were available to those who could afford them. The existence of these methods suggests that Egyptian couples had considerable control over their reproductive lives and could plan their families according to their desires and circumstances. The emotional aspects of intimate relationships were also well understood and valued in Egyptian society. Couples were encouraged to communicate openly about their feelings and desires, and various cultural practices supported the development of emotional intimacy between spouses. Love letters written on papyrus have survived from ancient Egypt, providing insights into how couples expressed their feelings for each other and maintained emotional connections during separations. These letters reveal deep affection, passionate desire, and tender concern that demonstrate the emotional sophistication of Egyptian relationships. The language used in these letters is often poetic and metaphorical, drawing on imagery from nature and religion to express complex emotions. Lovers compared each other to beautiful flowers, precious stones, and divine beings, creating elaborate verbal pictures that conveyed both physical attraction and spiritual connection. Music and poetry played important roles in maintaining romantic relationships throughout marriage, not just during the courtship period. Couples would compose songs for each other, perform music together, and attend cultural events that celebrated love and beauty. These activities provided opportunities for emotional expression and shared aesthetic experiences that strengthened their bonds. The physical environment of Egyptian homes was designed to support intimate relationships, with private spaces where couples could be alone together and beautiful surroundings that enhanced romantic feelings. Bedrooms were often decorated with images of love and fertility, while gardens provided secluded areas where couples could enjoy each other's company in beautiful, peaceful settings. Egyptian attitudes toward aging and long-term relationships were generally positive, with older couples expected to maintain affectionate and intimate relationships throughout their lives. The culture valued the wisdom and stability that came with long marriages, and elderly couples were often held up as examples of successful relationships for younger people to emulate. This positive attitude toward aging relationships was reflected in art and literature that depicted older couples with respect and affection continue and deepen throughout life. The Egyptians also understood that relationships required ongoing effort and attention to remain healthy and satisfying. Various cultural practices supported couples in maintaining their relationships, including regular festivals and celebrations that honored marriage and family life. Religious beliefs played important roles in Egyptian understanding of intimate relationships, with various deities associated with love, sexuality, and fertility. Couples would pray to these deities for blessing on their relationships, and would participate in religious ceremonies designed to strengthen their bonds and ensure their continued happiness. The goddess Hathor was particularly important in this regard, as she was believed to govern all aspects of love and sexuality. Couples would make offerings to Hathor and participate in festivals dedicated to her worship, seeking her blessing on their relationships and her protection against the various forces that might threaten their happiness. Other deities were also invoked for specific aspects of intimate relationships. Base, a dwarf god associated with protection and fertility, was often depicted in bedrooms and was believed to protect couples during their most vulnerable moments. Tauret, a hippopotamus goddess, was associated with childbirth and was invoked by couples hoping to conceive children. The integration of religious beliefs with intimate relationships reflected the Egyptian understanding that love and sexuality were sacred aspects of human experience that connected people to the divine realm. This spiritual dimension added depth and meaning to physical relationships, while also providing frameworks for understanding and addressing the challenges that all couples face. Despite the generally positive attitudes toward marriage and family life in ancient Egypt, couples inevitably faced various challenges and conflicts that tested their relationships and required careful management to resolve. Egyptian society recognized that even the most loving and compatible couples would encounter difficulties, and various cultural mechanisms existed to help them work through their problems. Economic pressures were among the most common sources of marital stress as families struggled to maintain their standard of living in the face of changing circumstances. Poor Nile floods could devastate agricultural production, leading to food shortages and economic hardship that strained family resources and tested couples' ability to work together under pressure. During times of economic difficulty, couples had to make difficult decisions about how to allocate their limited resources and might disagree about priorities and strategies. These disagreements could escalate into serious conflicts if not handled carefully, potentially threatening the stability of the marriage and the well-being of the entire family. Egyptian society provided various mechanisms for helping couples resolve economic disputes, including family councils where relatives could offer advice and mediation, and community leaders who could provide guidance and support. These interventions were designed to preserve marriages while also addressing the practical problems that had created the conflicts. Infertility was another major source of marital stress, as couples who were unable to have children faced both personal disappointment and social pressure. Children were considered essential for family continuity and economic security, and couples who remained childless after several years of marriage often experienced considerable anxiety and social stigma. Egyptian medical texts describe various treatments for infertility, indicating that this was a recognized medical condition that could potentially be addressed through appropriate interventions. These treatments ranged from herbal remedies and dietary changes to religious rituals and magical practices that were believed to enhance fertility. When medical treatments failed to produce results, couples might consider adoption or other arrangements that would provide them with children to raise and support them in their old age. Egyptian law provided frameworks for these arrangements, ensuring that adopted children had legal rights and protections, while also meeting the adoptive parents' needs for family continuity. Conflicts over child rearing were also common sources of marital tension, as parents might disagree about discipline, education, and other aspects of their children's upbringing. These disagreements could be particularly intense when they involved questions of inheritance and succession, especially in wealthy families where significant property and business interests were at stake. Egyptian culture emphasized the importance of consensus in family decision-making, encouraging couples to discuss their differences and reach agreements that reflected both parents' concerns and priorities. Extended family members often played important roles in these discussions, providing advice and perspective that helped couples find workable solutions. Adultery and other forms of sexual misconduct were serious threats to marital stability that could lead to divorce and social disgrace. Egyptian law provided clear guidelines about sexual behavior within marriage, and violations of these standards could result in severe penalties, including financial compensation and social ostracism. However, Egyptian society also recognized that sexual relationships were complex and that various factors might contribute to marital infidelity. Rather than simply punishing offenders, the culture provided mechanisms for addressing the underlying problems that might have led to the misconduct and for rebuilding trust and intimacy between spouses. Religious and community leaders played important roles in helping couples work through these difficult situations, providing counseling and guidance that addressed both the practical and emotional aspects of the problems. These interventions were designed to preserve marriages whenever possible, while also ensuring that the rights and dignity of all parties were protected. Conflicts between spouses and their extended families were another common source of marital stress, as couples had to balance their loyalty to each other with their obligations to parents, siblings, and other relatives. These conflicts could be particularly intense in households where multiple generations lived together and competed for resources and authority. Egyptian culture provided various strategies for managing these complex family dynamics, including clear hierarchies of authority and responsibility that helped prevent conflicts from escalating. However, these systems were not always effective, and couples sometimes had to make difficult choices between their marriages and their family obligations. Mental and physical health problems could also create significant challenges for married couples as they struggled to cope with illness, disability, and other conditions that affected their ability to fulfill their marital roles and responsibilities. Egyptian medical knowledge was quite advanced for its time, but many conditions remained untreatable and could place enormous stress on family relationships. Egyptian society recognized that illness and disability were facts of life that could affect anyone, and various cultural mechanisms existed to support families dealing with these challenges. Extended family networks provided practical assistance and emotional support, while religious beliefs offered frameworks for understanding and accepting difficult circumstances. The aging process itself could create challenges for married couples, as they faced declining health, reduced income, and changing family dynamics. Egyptian culture generally respected elderly people and expected younger family members to care for their aging relatives. Throughout their lives, Egyptian literature and art celebrated couples who managed this transition successfully, providing models and inspiration for others facing similar challenges. Divorce was available as a last resort for couples who could not resolve their differences, though it was generally discouraged and carried significant social and economic consequences. Egyptian divorce law was relatively equitable, providing protections for both spouses and ensuring that children's welfare was considered in any settlement. The divorce process typically involved extensive negotiations between the families involved, as they worked to divide property and arrange for child custody in ways that minimized harm to all parties. These negotiations could be complex and contentious, requiring the intervention of legal and religious authorities to reach acceptable resolutions. Despite the availability of divorce, most Egyptian couples worked hard to preserve their marriages and resolve their conflicts through other means. The culture provided numerous resources and support systems that helped couples weather difficult periods and rebuild their relationships on stronger foundations. The death of a spouse was perhaps the most profound challenge that married couples in ancient Egypt could face, marking the end of their earthly relationship while also beginning a complex process of mourning remembrance, and spiritual transition that reflected Egyptian beliefs about death and the afterlife. Egyptian attitudes toward death were shaped by their sophisticated religious beliefs about the continuation of life after physical death. They believed that death was not an ending, but a transformation that allowed the deceased to join the gods in the eternal realm, while maintaining connections to their living family members. This understanding of death as transformation rather than termination provided comfort to grieving spouses, while also creating obligations and expectations about how the deceased should be honored and remembered. The surviving spouse had important roles to play in ensuring that their partner's transition to the afterlife was successful and that their memory was preserved for future generations. The immediate period following a spouse's death was marked by intense mourning rituals that allowed the survivor to express their grief, while also beginning the process of spiritual and emotional healing. These rituals were highly structured and involved the entire extended family and community in supporting the bereaved spouse through their most difficult time. Egyptian mourning practices included specific behaviors and restrictions that demonstrated respect for the deceased, while also helping the survivor process their grief. The bereaved spouse would typically wear special clothing, avoid certain foods and activities, and participate in ritual lamentations that expressed their sorrow and honored their partner's memory. Professional mourners were often hired to assist with these rituals, providing expertise in the proper forms of lamentation and ensuring that the deceased received appropriate honors. These mourners were skilled performers who could express grief in ways that moved observers and created appropriate atmospheres for the various ceremonies involved in the mourning process. The preparation of the deceased spouse's body for burial was a complex process that required considerable time, expense, and expertise. Mummification was the preferred method of body preservation, as it was believed to be necessary for the deceased's successful transition to the afterlife and their eventual resurrection. The mummification process could take several weeks to complete and involved the removal of internal organs, the treatment of the body with various preservatives and chemicals, and the wrapping of the corpse in linen bandages that had been blessed and treated with protective substances. The surviving spouse played important roles in overseeing this process, making decisions about the level of treatment that would be provided and ensuring that all necessary rituals were performed correctly. These decisions reflected both the family's financial resources and their commitment to honoring the deceased appropriately. The funeral ceremony itself was an elaborate affair that combined religious ritual with social celebration of the deceased's life and achievements. These ceremonies provided opportunities for family members and friends to pay their respects, while also demonstrating the social status and accomplishments of both the deceased and their surviving family. Funeral processions were particularly important elements of these ceremonies, as they allowed the entire community to participate in honoring the deceased while also displaying the family's wealth and social connections. These processions could include hundreds of participants and might take several hours to complete their journey from the family home to the burial site. The burial site itself was carefully chosen to reflect the deceased's status and to provide appropriate conditions for their eternal rest. Wealthy families often constructed elaborate tombs that included multiple chambers, decorative artwork, and provisions for the deceased's comfort in the afterlife. These tombs were designed to serve as eternal homes for the deceased, complete with furniture, food, clothing, and other necessities that would be needed in the afterlife. The surviving spouse often played important roles in selecting and arranging these provisions, ensuring that their partner would be comfortable and well-equipped for their eternal journey. The period following the funeral was marked by ongoing mourning rituals and memorial activities that helped the surviving spouse maintain connections to their deceased partner while also beginning the process of rebuilding their life. These activities included regular visits to the tomb, offerings of food and other necessities, and prayers for the deceased's well-being in the afterlife. Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife included the possibility of ongoing communication between the living and the dead, and surviving spouses often wrote letters to their deceased partners, sharing news about family affairs and seeking guidance about important decisions. These letters were typically placed in the tomb or burned as offerings, ensuring that they would reach their intended recipients. The surviving spouse's social and economic situation often changed dramatically following their partner's death, requiring significant adjustments and adaptations. Widows, in particular, faced challenges in maintaining their independence and security, though Egyptian law provided various protections and support mechanisms. Egyptian inheritance law generally favored surviving spouses, ensuring that they retained control over significant portions of the family property and resources. This legal protection was essential for maintaining the widow's independence and providing faced social expectations and economic realities often pressured them to remarry or to rely on extended family members for support and protection. Remarriage was generally accepted and even encouraged for surviving spouses, particularly if they were still young enough to have children or if they needed economic support and protection. However, these second marriages often involved complex negotiations about property rights, inheritance, and the care of children from previous relationships. The memory of the deceased spouse was carefully preserved through various cultural practices that ensured their continued presence in family life and community memory. These practices included the maintenance of tomb monuments, the celebration of memorial festivals, and the telling of stories about the deceased's life and accomplishments. Children played particularly important roles in preserving their deceased parents' memory, carrying on family traditions and ensuring that future generations would remember and honor their ancestors. This responsibility was considered both a privilege and an obligation that connected the living to their ancestral heritage. The Egyptian understanding of death and remembrance provided frameworks for understanding loss and grief that helped surviving spouses cope with their bereavement, while also maintaining hope for eventual reunion in the afterlife. These beliefs offered comfort and meaning during the most difficult periods of mourning, while also providing motivation for living honorable and meaningful lives. Conclusion. Why? As our gentle journey through the intimate world of ancient Egyptian love and marriage draws to a close, we find ourselves back on the peaceful banks of the Nile, where the eternal rhythm of the river continues its ancient song. The stories we've shared tonight of courtship in moonlit gardens, of wedding celebrations that lasted for days, of couples who built lives together along these sacred waters, remind us that love is indeed one of humanity's most enduring and universal experiences. The ancient Egyptians understood that love was both a divine gift and a human responsibility, requiring both passion and wisdom to flourish. Their sophisticated approach to relationships, their celebration of both romantic love and practical partnership, and their understanding that marriage was a journey of growth and discovery, offer timeless insights that remain relevant today. As you drift toward peaceful sleep, carry with you the gentle wisdom of these ancient lovers, who knew that true happiness comes not from perfection, but from the willingness to share life's joys and sorrows with another soul. May their stories of enduring love and devotion inspire sweet dreams of your own heart's deepest desires, and may you wake refreshed and renewed, ready to embrace the love that surrounds you in your own life. Sleep well, dear listener, and may the gods of ancient Egypt watch over your dreams with the same tender care they showed to lovers along the eternal Nile throughout the Egyptian calendar year. Various festivals and seasonal celebrations provided special opportunities for couples to express their love and strengthen their bonds. These occasions were woven into the fabric of Egyptian society, creating rhythms of romance and renewal that supported healthy relationships and provided communities with shared experiences of joy and celebration. The Festival of Hathor was perhaps the most important romantic celebration in the Egyptian calendar, dedicated to the goddess of love, beauty, and fertility. This festival typically lasted for several days and featured elaborate ceremonies, musical performances, and communal feasts that celebrated all forms of love and affection. During the Festival of Hathor, married couples would renew their vows and exchange gifts that symbolized their continued commitment to each other. These renewal ceremonies were not legally required, but were considered spiritually important for maintaining the divine blessing on their relationships. The ceremonies often took place in temple courtyards, decorated with flowers and filled with the sound of harps and flutes. Young unmarried people used the Festival of Hathor as an opportunity to meet potential partners and begin new courtships. The festival's atmosphere of celebration and divine blessing created ideal conditions for romance, and many couples traced the beginning of their relationships to meetings that occurred during these joyous occasions. The festival featured various competitions and performances that allowed young people to display their talents and attractiveness to potential partners. Poetry, contests, musical performances, and dance competitions provided platforms for artistic expression, while also serving as informal courtship activities. The Opet Festival, which celebrated the annual flooding of the Nile, was another important occasion for romantic celebration. This festival symbolized renewal and fertility, making it an auspicious time for weddings, engagements, and other romantic milestones. The festival's association with the life-giving waters of the Nile made it particularly meaningful for couples hoping to conceive children. During the Opet Festival, couples would make pilgrimages to temples dedicated to fertility deities, offering prayers and gifts in hopes of receiving divine blessing on their relationships. These pilgrimages often became romantic journeys in themselves, providing couples with opportunities to travel together and share spiritual experiences that deepen their bonds. The festival also featured elaborate boat processions on the Nile, where couples could participate in communal celebrations while enjoying private moments together on the water. These boat rides were considered especially romantic as they combined the beauty of the river setting with the excitement of the festival atmosphere. Seasonal agricultural festivals provided additional opportunities for romantic celebration as communities gathered to mark important moments in the farming calendar. The planting festivals in spring were associated with new beginnings and were considered auspicious times for engagements and weddings. Harvest festivals in autumn celebrated abundance and prosperity, making them ideal occasions for couples to celebrate their achievements and plan for their future together. These festivals often featured elaborate feasts, where couples could enjoy fine food and wine while surrounded by family and friends. The winter solstice was marked by festivals of light that celebrated the return of longer days and the promise of spring's renewal. These celebrations were particularly meaningful for couples, as they symbolized hope and the eternal cycle of death and rebirth that governed all aspects of Egyptian life. Private romantic traditions also played important roles in Egyptian relationships, with couples developing personal rituals and customs that reflected their unique bonds and shared experiences. These traditions might include regular visits to special places that held meaning for the couple, the exchange of personal gifts on significant anniversaries, or the creation of private ceremonies that celebrated their love. Many couples maintained private gardens or special rooms in their homes that were dedicated to their relationship and decorated with objects that held romantic significance. These spaces provided retreats where couples could be alone together and focus on their emotional and physical connection away from the demands of daily life. The exchange of love letters was another important romantic tradition, with couples writing to each other even when they were not separated by travel or other circumstances. These letters served as expressions of affection and as permanent records of the couple's emotional journey together. Egyptian love letters often incorporated religious imagery and references to mythology, connecting the couple's personal relationship to the larger spiritual framework that governed their lives. These references added depth and meaning to personal expressions of love, while also invoking divine protection and blessing on the relationship. The creation and sharing of music was another important romantic tradition, with couples composing songs for each other and performing music together as expressions of their harmony and shared aesthetic sensibilities. Musical instruments were often given as romantic gifts, and the ability to play music together was considered a sign of compatibility and mutual understanding. Couples also participated in various craft activities together, creating beautiful objects that served both practical and symbolic purposes in their relationships. These might include the weaving of textiles with special patterns or colors that held personal meaning, the creation of jewelry with unique designs, or the decoration of household objects with romantic motifs. The sharing of meals was elevated to an art form in Egyptian romantic culture, with couples creating special dining experiences that combined fine food with intimate conversation and romantic atmosphere. These meals might feature foods that were believed to have aphrodisiac properties or symbolic meanings related to love and fertility. Couples often developed signature dishes or special recipes that became part of their personal romantic tradition. preparing these foods for each other on special occasions or when they wanted to express particular affection or appreciation. The practice of gift-giving extended throughout the year, with couples finding numerous occasions to express their love through carefully chosen presents. These gifts might commemorate personal milestones, seasonal celebrations, or simply spontaneous expressions of affection that kept romance alive in daily life. The most meaningful gifts were often those that required personal effort and creativity rather than simply monetary expense. Handmade objects, personally composed poems or songs, or gifts that demonstrated deep knowledge of the recipient's preferences and interests were particularly valued. Travel and pilgrimage provided additional opportunities for romantic bonding as couples journeyed together to visit sacred sites, attend festivals in distant cities, or simply explore the beautiful landscapes along the Nile. These shared adventures created lasting memories and strengthened the couple's sense of partnership and mutual dependence. The planning and anticipation of these journeys were often as important as the trips themselves, providing couples with shared goals and dreams that enhanced their sense of unity and common purpose. The challenges and discoveries encountered during travel also provided opportunities for couples to learn more about each other and to develop deeper appreciation for their partners' qualities and capabilities. The success of Egyptian marriages depended not only on the compatibility and commitment of the couples themselves, but also on the support and involvement of their extended families and broader communities. Egyptian society recognized that marriage was not simply a private relationship between two individuals, but a social institution that affected entire networks of relatives, friends, and neighbors. Extended family members played crucial roles in supporting married couples through various challenges and transitions, providing practical assistance, emotional support, and wisdom gained from their own experiences. Grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins all had recognized responsibilities for helping couples maintain healthy relationships and resolve conflicts that might threaten their marriages. The involvement of extended family in married life began during the courtship period and continued throughout the couple's life together. Family elders served as advisors and mediators, helping couples navigate difficult decisions and providing perspective based on their longer experience of life and relationships. Mothers-in-law held particularly important positions in this family support system, as they were responsible for helping their daughters-in-law adapt to their new households and learn the specific customs and expectations of their husband's family. This relationship could be challenging, as it required both women to balance their loyalty to their sons and husbands with their need to establish positive relationships with each other. Successful mothers-in-law understood that their role was to support their sons' marriages rather than to compete with their daughters-in-law for influence and affection. They provided guidance and assistance, while also respecting the autonomy and authority of the younger couple in their own household affairs. Fathers-in-law also played important roles in supporting their children's marriages, particularly in providing economic guidance and assistance during times of financial difficulty. They served as mentors to their sons-in-law, helping them develop the skills and knowledge necessary for successful household management and community leadership. Siblings and cousins provided peer support and companionship that helped married couples maintain connections to their broader family networks while also developing their own independent relationships. These relationships were particularly important for women, who might otherwise become isolated within their husbands, family, and community. The Egyptian extended family system also provided practical benefits that supported successful marriages, including shared resources during times of economic hardship, assistance with child care and household management, and support during illness or other crises that might threaten the family's stability. Community involvement in marriage relationships extended beyond the immediate family to include neighbors, friends, and various social and religious organizations that provided additional layers of support and accountability. These community connections helped ensure that couples received the assistance they needed while also maintaining standards of behavior that supported stable family life. Religious communities played particularly important roles in supporting marriages, providing spiritual guidance and practical assistance that helped couples maintain their relationships according to divine principles. Priests and other religious leaders served as counselors and mediators, helping couples resolve conflicts and strengthen their spiritual bonds. Temple communities also provided social networks that connected couples with other families who shared their religious beliefs and values. These connections created support systems that extended beyond immediate family relationships and provided additional resources for couples facing various challenges. Professional guilds and trade associations provided similar support networks for couples whose livelihoods depended on specific crafts or occupations. These organizations helped ensure that families had economic security while also maintaining standards of professional conduct. Neighborhood communities were perhaps the most immediate and important sources of daily support for married couples, as neighbors provided assistance with routine tasks, emergency help during crises, and social companionship that enriched family life. The close-knit nature of Egyptian communities meant that neighbors often knew each other intimately and felt responsible for each other's welfare. These neighborhood relationships were maintained through various social customs and obligations that ensured regular interaction and mutual support. Neighbors might share tools and resources, assist with major household projects, and provide child care during emergencies or special occasions. Community festivals and celebrations provided opportunities for couples to strengthen their relationships with their neighbors while also enjoying shared experiences that enriched their social lives. These events created bonds of friendship and mutual obligation that supported stable community life. The role of community elders in supporting marriages was particularly important, as these respected individuals provided wisdom and guidance based on their long experience of life and relationships. Community elders often served as informal mediators in disputes and provided advice about various aspects of married life. These elders were also responsible for maintaining community standards and traditions that supported healthy family relationships. They provided continuity between generations and ensured that important cultural knowledge about marriage and family life was passed down to younger community members. The Egyptian legal system also provided community-based support for marriages through local courts and administrative officials who were responsible for enforcing marriage contracts and resolving disputes that couples could not settle themselves. These legal mechanisms provided final recourse for serious problems, while also encouraging couples to resolve their differences through family and community mediation. Local officials often had personal relationships with the families in their jurisdictions and could provide informal guidance and assistance that helped prevent minor problems from escalating into serious conflicts. Their involvement in marriage relationships reflected the community's investment in maintaining stable family life. Economic cooperation within communities also supported successful marriages by providing opportunities for families to share resources and reduce individual financial pressures. Cooperative work arrangements, shared ownership of expensive tools and equipment, and mutual assistance during harvest and other labor-intensive activities helped ensure that all families had access to the resources they needed for prosperity. These economic relationships created networks of mutual dependence that encouraged cooperation and discouraged behavior that might threaten community stability. Families who maintained good relationships with their neighbors were more likely to receive assistance during difficult times and to have access to economic opportunities that supported their prosperity. The education and socialization of children was another area where community involvement supported successful marriages by ensuring that young people learned appropriate values and behaviors that would prepare them for their own future relationships. Community members shared responsibility for teaching children about marriage and family life, providing multiple sources of guidance and support. This shared responsibility for tutoring helped ensure that young people received consistent messages about the importance of marriage and family, while also exposing them to various models of successful relationships. Children who grew up in supportive communities were more likely to develop the skills and attitudes necessary for their own successful marriages. Community involvement in marriage relationships also provided accountability mechanisms that encouraged couples to maintain high standards of behavior and to work through their problems, rather than simply abandoning their relationships when difficulties arose. The knowledge that their behavior was observed and evaluated by their community provided additional motivation for couples to honor their commitments and maintain their relationships. This community accountability was balanced by support and assistance that helped couples address the underlying problems that might threaten their relationships. The combination of accountability and support created environments where marriages were more likely to succeed and where couples felt encouraged to invest in their relationships for the long term. The ultimate measure of a successful marriage in ancient Egypt was not simply the happiness and compatibility of the couple themselves, but their ability to create lasting legacies that would benefit their families and communities for generations to come. Egyptian couples understood that their relationships were part of a larger continuum of human experience that connected them to their ancestors and descendants in an eternal chain of love and responsibility. The creation of children was obviously the most important aspect of this legacy, as children represented the continuation of the family line and the preservation of the couple's genetic and cultural heritage. However, Egyptian couples also understood that simply producing children was not sufficient. They had to raise those children to be productive, moral, and capable adults who would honor their parents' memory and contribute positively to their communities. The education and moral development of children required enormous investments of time, energy, and resources that tested couples' ability to work together toward common goals. Parents had to agree on educational priorities, disciplinary approaches, and the values they wanted to instill in their children. These decisions required ongoing communication and compromise that strengthened the couple's relationships, while also ensuring that their children received consistent guidance. Egyptian parents took their educational responsibilities very seriously, understanding that their children's success or failure would reflect on their own competence and character. This responsibility provided additional motivation for couples to maintain stable, harmonious relationships that would provide positive models for their children to emulate. The transmission of family traditions and cultural knowledge was another important aspect of the legacy that couples created together. Each family had its own unique customs, stories, and practices that needed to be preserved and passed down to future generations. Couples worked together to maintain these traditions while also adapting them to changing circumstances and adding their own contributions to the family heritage. This process of cultural transmission required couples to develop deep understanding of their own family histories and to make conscious decisions about which traditions to preserve, which to modify, and which to abandon. These decisions reflected the couple's values and priorities, while also shaping the cultural environment in which their children would grow up. The economic legacy that couples created was also crucial for their family's long-term prosperity and security. Egyptian couples worked throughout their lives to accumulate property, develop business relationships, and create economic opportunities that would benefit their children and grandchildren. This economic planning required careful coordination and shared sacrifice that tested couples' commitment to their common future. Successful couples understood that their economic decisions had implications that extended far beyond their own lifetimes. They made investments in land, businesses, and education that would provide their descendants with advantages and opportunities for continued prosperity. These long-term investments required patience and discipline that strengthened couples' relationships while also building family wealth. The social and political legacy that couples created through their community involvement and public service also contributed to their family's long-term success and reputation. Egyptian couples who participated actively in community affairs and maintained good relationships with their neighbors created social capital that benefited their entire families. This social legacy included the reputation for honesty, reliability, and civic responsibility that families developed over time. Couples who maintained high standards of behavior and contributed positively to their communities created advantages for their children and grandchildren that extended far beyond material wealth. The spiritual legacy that couples created through their religious observances and moral behavior was perhaps the most important aspect of their contribution to future generations. Egyptian couples understood that their relationship with the divine realm affected not only their own spiritual well-being, but also the spiritual health of their entire family line. This spiritual responsibility required couples to maintain high standards of religious observance and moral behavior throughout their lives. They participated in religious ceremonies, made appropriate offerings to the gods, and lived according to the ethical principles that governed Egyptian society. These practices created spiritual protection and blessing that would benefit their descendants for generations. The artistic and cultural contributions that couples made to their communities also formed part of their lasting legacy. Many Egyptian couples patronized artists and craftsmen, commissioned beautiful objects for temples and public buildings, and supported cultural activities that enriched their communities' spiritual and aesthetic life. These cultural contributions reflected the couple's values and tastes, while also providing lasting monuments to their memory and achievements. Beautiful buildings, works of art, and cultural institutions the couples supported continued to benefit their communities long after the couples themselves had died. The written records the couples left behind also contributed to their legacy, providing future generations with insights into their thoughts, experiences, and wisdom. Egyptian couples often maintained detailed records of their business affairs, family histories, and personal reflections that served as valuable resources for their descendants. These written legacies included not only practical information about property and business relationships, but also personal insights about marriage, family life, and the challenges and rewards of building a life together. Future generations could learn from their ancestors' experiences and apply their wisdom to their own relationships and challenges. The physical monuments that couples created also served as lasting reminders of their love and achievements. Wealthy couples often commissioned elaborate tombs that would serve as their eternal resting places, while also demonstrating their status and accomplishments to future generations. These monuments included not only the tombs themselves, but also the artwork, inscriptions, and grave goods that reflected the couple's personalities and values. Even couples of modest means found ways to create lasting physical reminders of their relationships, whether through simple grave markers, family shrines, or contributions to community projects that would bear their names and preserve their memory. The influence that couples had on their children's marriages and family relationships also formed an important part of their legacy. Parents who modeled healthy, loving relationships provided their children with positive examples that influenced their own approach to marriage and family life. This influence could extend through multiple generations, creating family traditions of strong, stable relationships. Conversely, couples who failed to maintain healthy relationships could create negative patterns that affected their descendants for generations. Egyptian couples understood this responsibility and worked hard to provide positive models that would benefit their children and grandchildren. The community impact of successful marriages also contributed to couples' lasting legacies. Stable, loving families provided foundations for healthy communities, while troubled families could create problems that affected entire neighborhoods and social networks. Egyptian couples understood that their set relationships had implications that extended far beyond their own households. This understanding provided additional motivation for couples to work through their problems and maintain their relationships, even during difficult times. They recognized that their success or failure would affect not only their own happiness, but also the well-being of their entire community. As our exploration of love and marriage in ancient Egypt draws to its gentle close, we can see that these ancient couples understood something profound about the nature of human relationships. They recognized that love was not simply a private emotion but a force that connected individuals to their families, communities, and the divine realm itself. Their sophisticated understanding of marriage as both a personal relationship and a social institution provided them with frameworks for building relationships that could withstand the challenges of time and circumstance, while also contributing to the greater good of their society. The legacy of their wisdom continues to resonate today, reminding us that the most meaningful relationships are those that extend beyond the immediate gratification of personal desires to encompass broader purposes and deeper meanings. Their example encourages us to approach our own relationships with the same combination of passion and responsibility, understanding that true love requires not only emotional connection, but also shared commitment to creating something larger and more lasting than ourselves. Conclusion. Lang Bai Ling Ling, Lang Bai Ling R, Ling Ling. As our gentle journey through the intimate world of ancient Egyptian love and marriage draws to a close, we find ourselves back on the peaceful banks of the Nile, where the eternal rhythm of the river continues its ancient song. The stories we've shared tonight of courtship in moonlit gardens, of wedding celebrations that lasted for days, of couples who built lives together along these sacred waters, remind us that love is indeed one of humanity's most enduring and universal experiences. The ancient Egyptians understood that love was both a divine gift and a human responsibility, requiring both passion and wisdom to flourish. Their sophisticated approach to relationships, their celebration of both romantic love and practical partnership, and their understanding that marriage was a journey of growth and discovery offered timeless insights that remain relevant today. As you drift toward peaceful sleep, carry with you the gentle wisdom of these ancient lovers, who knew that true happiness comes not from perfection, but from the willingness to share life's joys and sorrows with another soul. May their stories of enduring love and devotion inspire sweet dreams of your own heart's deepest desires, and may you wake refreshed and renewed, ready to embrace the love that surrounds you in your own life. Sleep well, dear listener, and may the gods of ancient Egypt watch over your dreams with the same tender care they showed to lovers along the eternal Nile.